Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from central British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, oh, we know where Canada is, in British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right. And then we are in the center of British Columbia, and it's a beautiful, beautiful area, big province actually. We are about 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers in a city called Prince George. And we have lots of lakes here, lots of timber, lots of friends, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, foxes, wolves, you name it, we have them all. And we call it paradise. Today we got a very interesting guest. His name is Sean Blackwell. And Sean is a pioneering voice shaping for the world's understanding bipolar disorder, mental health, and spiritual transformation. He is also an author, Bipolar Awakening, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, a groundbreaking work, and he will be talking about that. And since 2007 has dedicated a career illuminating in overlooked spiritual and transformation dimensions bipolar disorder through YouTube channels, global workshops, and other media. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for being here. It was a short notice, but I'm glad I could make it.
Yeah. So you are now physically in Brazil.
That's right. I'm Canadian. I'm born in Toronto, lived in Vancouver for a while, but now I live in Santos, Brazil.
And Brazil is a big, big country, and an amazing, beautiful country. Lots of timber, obviously. The Amazon comes to mind, and the language they speak in Brazil, correct me if I'm wrong, is Portuguese.
That's right. That's right, Portuguese.
And so
it's not easy for me. But after 20 years, I can get by.
Interesting. So, Sean, tell us about you and your background, other than what you already told us. You were born in Toronto, and then take us forward from there and your career first and foremost, and then obviously at some point you became aware of bipolar, and tell us about that part as well. And as you already know, and just sharing it with our friends watching us around the world, I'm ADHD and have dyslexia. Was affected by PTSD from the war years, was born in 1940. So November the 1st, I turned 85 years young. And,
Wow.
so...
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. So tell us all about you.
Wow. And it's fun talking to somebody who's up in Canada, because I grew up in North Scarborough outside of Toronto. Is a land of hockey and fighting and hockey, in the 1970s and the 1980s. And then I was really confused about what kind of career I wanted. And when I went into university at the University of Toronto, I went into business. I thought I would take a Bachelor of Commerce, but the only thing I was really interested in was religion. I'd gone to Catholic school, and I was trying to sort of come to terms with my faith, and actually at that time being like 19, trying to find the right one. Like, what's the right religion for me in a sense, And still I left university kind of confused and kind of atheistic in a way, like agnostic. I didn't think there was a set answer. I didn't think there was a right religion to begin with. And I went into advertising because advertising was about ideas, and so was religion. So I thought, well, there's a bit of a weird transition there, but let me go into that area. And while I did have a certain aptitude early on, it was very difficult for me because I felt like I was underemployed. It was the recession of the early 90s. I'd come in, and I was making, in my first year in advertising, well, I had made more money working at the supermarket when I was 18 than I did in my first year of advertising. It was terrible, So those first few years were a real struggle. And then one day I just decided, you know what? fuck this. I'm on my way. And I went to Vancouver. And in Vancouver, got a better job in advertising with the same company. But things started to open up for me a little bit. It was like this was the first time I had really taken a leap that was irrational because all I had was $2,000 in my car. And so when I drove from Toronto to Vancouver, really had nothing, but I had a place to stay, you know. But everything started to work out in an interesting way and got me interested in spirituality again. I started reading books about Buddhism, for example, astrology. It all started to open up when I was in Vancouver, right? But things still struggled with my advertising career to the point where I decided that I needed to do a self-help course called the Landmark Forum. And to make a long story short, well, this is a brief part of the whole thing. I signed up for the course in Vancouver, and then I went to work one day, and there was a job opportunity in Toronto that I really wanted in a different area of advertising. And so I decided to pack up, went back to Toronto. I was 30 at this time, and took the course on the Landmark Forum in Toronto. Okay. And on that course had a very powerful 5-minute meditation where a trauma from my scuba diving experience from a few months earlier had opened up. And then all of a sudden I was crying. I was feeling fear I'd never felt before. All my senses sharpened. And I was kind of in a bit of a very different reality at that point. So that was the spiritual experience that got me going. But then it led to the psychiatric hospital. But I'll give you a minute if you have any questions at this point.
No. I like what you're talking about. And then how long were you in Vancouver before you decided to go back to Toronto? How long were you in Vancouver?
It was a little bit less than 2 years.
Okay.
You know? And the first year, everything went perfectly, exactly the way I wanted to. It was wonderful. And then the second year, everything started falling apart. It was almost like life was saying, okay, you've had your fun out in Vancouver. You've been skiing, you've been scuba diving, you've been traveling to Seattle to party. Now it's time to get back on your horse and go home, you know.
Now, the other part for people watching us from around the world, Vancouver is a major city in British Columbia. Obviously, the capital of British Columbia is Victoria, and on Vancouver Island. And then the major city, a lot of the people that live in British Columbia is about close to approaching 6 million people, actually. 2.5 million people are living in the surrounding area of Vancouver. So it's a big area and a very, very involved area. A beautiful, beautiful city for many reasons. And, and then obviously we are podcasting 800 miles or 800 kilometers north of Vancouver in a city called Prince George. And the interesting part about Sean is he spent time not only in Vancouver, but I'm sure he saw Victoria, as well as Kelowna and some of the other cities in British Columbia. Now, the interesting part that you're coming to is that at one point trying to find religion initially and but grown up, correct me if I'm wrong, as Catholic, but then from there
That's
and then it always stayed in your mind in terms of where do I go from a religious perspective. Now for me, I grew up in Holland, was born in 1940, turned 85 years young here on November the 1st. Holland is a very interesting country. It's very liberal in a way and then very religious on the other side. It tends to be Christian Reformed or some form of Lutheran baptism in the region, northern part of Holland, and the southern part tends to be Catholic. And over the years, and for myself, I always was, although part of my family very religious, Christian Reformed, Dutch Reformed category. I was always agnostic, as you already indicated, not an atheist, but agnostic, and basically saying, I don't understand what happens after, and all of the other things I find out when I get there, if I do. And then obviously You know, certain things about different religions are difficult for me to understand in a lot of ways, and so agnostic, I don't understand. I do the best I can, and I try to be a decent individual in my life and give back to communities, all that kind of stuff. So come back
Sure.
so what you then did when you came back to Toronto, at one point, which seems to be a critical point, that something happened to you that where you bursted out and relating back to an accident that happened while you were swimming out in water, and the anxiety came back and all the things around it that kind of tested you in some form. So was that critical?
Yeah. Sure. And what happened was I'm in the middle of this fear meditation at the Landmark Forum. It's just a simple 5-minute meditation with 150 people.
Right.
And I didn't think I felt fear. But then all of a sudden, I saw the depth gauge that I was watching during my scuba diving accident from a few months earlier. And I had lost my weight belt. This was off of Vancouver Island. I lost my weight belt about 30 meters below the surface. And I went shooting to the surface. And I was watching that depth gauge, wondering if I was going to be alive when I hit the surface. So in the meditation, all the fear and tears of that moment came to me that had been completely blocked, you know. And when it was done, all my senses had sharpened. I could see detail in curtains I couldn't see before. My sense of smell was sharper. And I had a sense of finally knowing what had been missing for many years. And when I went home, I was talking to my family about family issues. It was just like I just came out of the Jack in the Box, if you know what I mean. Now, this situation continued for about 5 days until the last day of the course. I thought I felt so perfect that this was the only sensation I would have when I was dead. And it hit me in that moment that I had died in the scuba diving accident and that everything else in between had been kind of a purgatory between earth and heaven, or some sort of nirvana or something. I wasn't sure. So what happens is I leave the course and go into an adjacent ballroom because the course was taking place in the hotel. And I thought I was being tested by God, took off all my clothes. And I'll save you the horrific details, but I was arrested by the police
The
eventually.
gory
And they put
details.
me in. What's that? The gory details. Yeah, it is a little bit, maybe too much for your audience, we might
No,
say.
no. That's why we're here. That's
Yeah,
why we want to know it all.
Well, I took my clothes off to meet God. I was down to my underwear. And at one point, I felt like I needed to let go of everything. And I peed on the carpet of this hotel ballroom. This was a Westin hotel, downtown Toronto. And I laid down right in it. I was laying there in my own urine. That's how out I was. Okay. But it was all very sacred to me. It was like a religious process. And there was even bells playing near the end of this process that to me sounded like church bells in the middle of a Catholic mass. At the stages of the mass, you'll hear these bells. Eventually, the police came and arrested me and took me to the psychiatric hospital. And I still thought I was going to heaven until they forcibly injected me, where they had like 5 security guards with their hands on me. And, I'm face down naked until my underwear. They put their hands on me. And then the psychiatrist injected me, even though he said that if I'd be quiet. I said to him, if I'm quiet, will you take the needle away? And he said, yes. And so I settled down and I got quiet and he still injected me. At that moment, I thought, okay, God wouldn't test me like this. This was a kind of a violation. But I went to sleep. It was a sedative of some kind they gave me. 48 hours, I woke up and I told the doctors that, and I realized I wasn't in heaven, that's for sure. I didn't know where I was exactly. I knew it looked like a hospital, but I told them I thought I had some sort of PTSD reaction to the scuba diving accident that got triggered at the forum. I thought I'd impress them with a little intellectual knowledge and it seemed like a good explanation. But what I didn't tell them was that I was feeling much better than I'd had for maybe the last decade. Years of depression just seemed to vaporize. And when I went home, I spent a few months integrating, just staying quiet. I had a friend of mine who was very supportive of my perspective on it being a spiritual experience. But when I went back to work, everything got easier. I got the job I was looking for in Toronto. And then my salary tripled over the next 3 years. So I went from starting salary of $35,000 Canadian to getting a job in the United States that was paying me $100,000 Canadian. And that was a 3-year shift, and the reason I bring it up is that when people tell a story like mine, people usually are at home thinking, well, maybe he's still crazy. Like this is still going on. But when they hear the bottom line about how it came through on the money side, it's like, well, that doesn't happen if you've got some serious disorders there. So that was a big breakthrough. And a year after, I learned about the work of Dr. Stan Grof, and he coined an experience like this, a spiritual emergency, something that looks like what psychiatry would call acute psychosis that can be labeled schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, but can be very beneficial for you. And I had all the symptoms that he was listing for the spiritual emergency. And so from that point in 97, I told myself, well, that's what happened to me. I didn't have a mental illness, and I always knew that. But I thought mental illness was on one side and spiritual emergency was way different. Like a spiritual experience was completely different from a mental illness. And then I spent the next 10 years thinking that, right? And met my wife, who's Brazilian, and I moved to Brazil and became an English teacher eventually. I left my job in advertising, which wasn't in my heart. And I actually found the best years of my life being an English teacher in Brazil. So that was my part of the story, all right?
Interesting. So spiritual. How did
Still
you
with
call?
me?
Yes. Oh no, I'm with you. So
Good.
then the connection to bipolar or schizophrenia, or the connection is mental diversity issues. Does that all kind of semi-fit into the category of not fully understood at times and still evolving as we speak to a certain extent?
Well, as far as schizophrenia and bipolar go, that was something that the psychiatrist told my parents I could possibly have. They also said it could be a one-time incident, but that it's possibly bipolar or schizophrenia, as if those are separate mental illnesses. For me, for those next 10 years, I thought it was completely different from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. I didn't think it had anything to do with it. All my delusions were entirely spiritual. I had heightened senses, a sense of oneness, a feeling of all-knowingness, feeling I was being tested by God, that I needed to go see God in a pure state, thinking I was dead and going to heaven. This is all spiritual content, right?
Yes.
But 10 years later, just minding my own business in Brazil with my wife,
Now
got a
you're
phone
in your
call.
early 40s, 10 years later.
I am 37.
not
I'm 40. I'm 40.
Yeah,
40.
so when this happened,
41.
that you got and you talked to your wife, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, take us further.
Okay, so I told you about, so I talked to my wife about Anna's condition.
Right.
And it sounded to me like what happened to me. And so we went up to support her in an empathetic way, which I thought could help.
Right.
And I told the family for the first time about what happened to me in the psychiatric hospital 10 years earlier.
Right.
And that it was a good thing for me, that it had been beneficial.
Right.
Well, she did okay, but the doctors medicated her with bipolar. They sort of gave her that initial diagnosis. And then I was like, well, I don't get it. What's the difference between what happened to her and what happened to me?
Exactly.
And then I started this deep research process, going back not only to Stan Grof's work, the guy who created Spiritual Emergency,
Right.
but many other pioneering psychiatrists and psychologists from the 70s who actually saw acute psychosis as an intended reorganization of the psyche. It was intended to be a healing process, the whole thing. Okay.
Right.
And so at that point, I realized that this 1 in 20,000 experience that I had was actually more like 1 in 20, because a lot of people have bipolar disorder. A lot of people have these kind of acute breaks, And I was prepared, studying these pioneering psychiatrists and psychologists. They had learned that if it's a first break, if you bring empathy, that these people can naturally recover with about 6 days of support. And they called that the Soteria House method because there was a clinic called Soteria House that would support people empathetically. And actually, empathetic people were better at supporting than trained PhDs because the PhDs would pull rank on people in moments of stress. See, so the most important thing wasn't your education, it was your empathy. Listening to that, I thought, well, let's go back to the family and say, let's take Anna off her medication and we can support her and see how we do. Well, as I'm getting ready to go meet the family again, Anna's older sister, Eliana, returns from Europe. She was on a trip, sees her sister, and she goes into acute psychosis. She has a break with reality. So two sisters having their first period of acute psychosis, which could be labeled bipolar disorder, 4 months apart. This was unbelievable. But Eliana, the older sister, knew about my work, at what I'd been studying, and came to us directly instead of going to her family or a psychiatrist. And we were able to support her through the first episode without telling her parents. She would go on to have a second episode. And then after that, we agreed with the family to help her through a third, to support her through the third. And we were able to do that. And she returned to university, medication free, never saw a psychiatrist, finished with honors, went on to have a great job. 7 years down the road, while working on a master's degree, she started to have symptoms again. Eliana, the older sister, would go back to university medication free.
Right.
She went on to have a very good job after that, finished university with honors.
Right.
And then she went and did her master's degree, which was 7 years later. And then she started to have some issues again.
Right.
But back at the time, it was a big victory for us just to get her back into university medication free and get her those 7 years. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that became a life mission. And I made my YouTube channel, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up, where I started to talk about all aspects of this topic.
So now the other thing, you wrote the book, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder. I have a copy. Oh, there you got it. And it's that particular book. How long ago did you write that one, Sean?
Yeah. Now, the story I just told you, this whole thing from my hospitalization to the two nieces, that's in my first book, which I called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up?
Yeah.
And then I was on a struggle to find out how I could help other people in a more consistent way. And that struggle to help other people in a more consistent way is what I write about in the second book, Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder.
This is really the second book, right?
Yeah. And this is like my thesis. This is the one that's designed not only for people with bipolar disorder, but also for therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. And I wrote this last year, 2007.
Okay, and that was the other question. When did you write the first one? How long ago?
2000. The original draft for a psychologist, I wrote about my story that only went to a psychologist in around 98 or 99. But then I published it in 2011 on Amazon.
Okay. And so both of them are still available on Amazon and the other ones?
They're on Amazon and they're available as free PDFs on my website. And we can mention that a little bit later as well.
Okay. And the audios as well, or did you not do the audios?
No, I haven't done the audio yet.
Okay. So I'm just coming back to your nieces, and I have not read the books, obviously, but just again thinking that the third time that she went into again a session like that is, what was the cause for it, at least in your opinion? Was it how would you call it then? Was it?
Right. Well, in our case, in this case with this family issue, in a bigger picture, I kind of see it as meant to be in some sort of strange way. Because, you've got two sisters having their first episodes 4 months apart. This makes no sense. It's unbelievable and so close to my own experience. So there's that. But studying Grof's work, what I came to understand is that actually when people are having these kind of disorders like bipolar disorder or ADHD, schizophrenia, this whole range, that it's actually rooted in trauma, you know?
Okay.
And part of the trauma, for example, for Eliana, the older niece, part of the trauma was actually, or maybe the trigger in this case, was seeing her own sister in this state. That had an impact. She had had a lot of international travel, which is a common trigger. She had had some drug use, which is a common trigger. You know, not a lot, but there was some of that there. And there were family issues, I believe, that played a role as well. And if you look at somebody's life when they actually start the healing process, a lot of stuff comes up related to your childhood trauma. Many people have been abused, for example, physically or sexually. And this is the kind of material that I started to learn about as I started to work with other clients in the future.
So did you call it religious diversity issues? Did you use that term, or did I misinterpret that part?
Religious diversity issue?
Yes. No, you
I didn't use.
okay, so you related to,
Go ahead.
maybe I got it wrong. You related to, from the beginning in the early stages with yourself, is saying that it was misinterpreted in a way that you didn't, relating again to your upbringing, your early stages of life, until you came to that class where you totally broke down in Toronto, and then the interpretation at that point was what? Because it was still not considered to be bipolar, or what? Yeah.
Well, the experience that I went through, I had my interpretation, which was that it was a spiritual emergency.
Okay, that's
Spiritual
what
emergency,
I was.
which was
Okay, sorry.
okay.
That's what I was.
The term.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Oh, you were saying
for.
spiritual diversity. Yeah,
Yes.
spiritual emergency. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah, spiritual.
And that
diversity.
came from the work of Dr.
Grof.
Spiritual emergency.
Yes, Dr. Grox, right? Correct.
Grof, Stan Grof.
Yeah. So was that then what you kind of interpreted with your nieces as well?
Yes.
Yes.
That was my initial perspective.
Right.
But then in working with them and doing research online, part of my research is I went on YouTube and started to ask people, what do you think is the difference between what I went through and bipolar disorder? And I had many people write me saying, look, I had a very similar experience to you, and I'm medicated for life. And as I got into the information, what I realized was that almost everybody who goes into what we'll call acute psychosis, break with reality, that gets diagnosed as either bipolar 1 or schizophrenia or schizoaffective, those terms, they have these strong spiritual aspects to whatever they're going through that will tend to fit within their culture. So, for example, if you're in a Christian culture, you might see yourself as Jesus or having visions of Mary, something like that. But if you're in India, it would be, oh, you're meeting Krishna, or Ganesh is coming to you, that kind of thing.
And then what happens is then taking medication or something for life. What would it be? Is it similar to many that they then make the interpretation of bipolar, therefore the medication you must take is this, or whatever that is?
When psychiatry tells you that you've got bipolar disorder, their assumption is that you're going to be medicated for the rest of your life. If people ask to go off the medication, sometimes they comply and say, okay, let's try and see how it goes. But most of the time, people will relapse and they'll need the medication. Because the whole intention of releasing the trauma, remember I said that from these pioneering psychiatrists, the intention of the psychosis is to heal you, is a reorganization of the psyche. You might think of it as like, when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon and becomes a butterfly, to turn into a butterfly, at one point, there are no parts to this animal. It's all gel, you know? And in the same way, when we go into psychosis, it's almost like our mind becomes gel. We can't function. But then once we get reorganized, we can come back stronger and more authentic. And that's the model that I was following.
Interesting parts about it is and just relating it to my own background. Obviously, I grew up, I was born in November the 1st, 1940, just before the war started, and things were extremely difficult. My mom and dad were married in 1938. They were in love. They had rented half a duplex, and this was in northeastern Holland. And my dad had a job in a lumber mill, and so they were the happiest people in the world, and very quickly had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And then what happened is that, as we know from history, in 1939, a dictator called Adolf Hitler decided that Poland would become part of Germany, should be part of Germany. They started invading, and it would become obvious that he would move further west into Europe and also Holland. And so my dad then was called into the Dutch army in April of 1940, and the last time that they heard from him or saw him was just before the bombing of Rotterdam. And Rotterdam is a huge, big city, and Hitler bombed it because they didn't capitulate quick enough for his liking. So he was sending them a signal to bomb the downtown of Rotterdam, killed thousands of people. And so the last time we saw my dad was down just before the bombing, and for 5 years, my mom and family would not know if he lived or died. And for her, being pregnant with me and having 2 young kids already, so things became very, very challenging and difficult, not only for her, but for everybody in the region. So she was pretty much on their own because everybody had their own issues to try to survive. And the first thing that I remember as a 3.5-year-old is hundreds of bombers overhead that were bombing the war infrastructure of the Germans in northeast and northwestern part of Germany, where it touches the North Sea. And so they bombed that, and we were about 10 or 15 minutes from the border. I remember still my mom would take us outside more than anything because she felt safer outside than inside. And at nights we could see in the distance cities burning and all of those things. And then the next thing that I remember is in 1944, is that it was the Germans cut off all the food supply to Holland and other places, and we would go as kids, my brother, my sister, myself, every morning with gunny sacks, go into the railroad yards, pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, because they wouldn't kill us or shoot us, they would just boot us one, and we'd be back the following morning. And then other things that I remember is the winter of 1944 and 1945 was the coldest on record in Holland, and I still remember, even now still, 80 years later, I can feel the feeling of hunger, and I can feel the cold. We had a little room in the house heated because we had no fuel, and so we was extremely hot in the front and freezing in the back. And then the next thing that I remember, we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And it made and we saw far too much that we should not have seen, and all the things relating to wars, and the Canadian Army liberated us, and it made such an impression on me that I knew from that time forward as a little 5-year-old that if I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada, and I did. And but the point is that all of that stayed always with me in terms of PTSD being part of my life, and then the other part, the inner child, the fear of losing the one parent always stayed with me. Got counseling for that actually already, well into my 50s, immensely emotional, but very beneficial and helpful in a way. And so the combination of all of that part is still, even still now, very much still part of me. PTSD, and I do usually presentations to schools here the week of the Rememberings Day to just share with them, because I'm one of the few persons left that was part of the war and saw the beginning of it, during the war, and then the end of it, where families took sometimes generations before things got back to a sense of normality. And I have an obligation to speak and present that I try to do at least 2 or 3 schools to tell everybody how fortunate they are living in North America and how quickly things can change and everything can change. But the point that I was going to make is this one, is that it was by pure coincidence, I had no idea what ADHD was or dyslexia until in 1997. I already was here for 32 years and been very successful and did books, and I picked up a book in the store, and this is the actual book I picked up in 1997.
Different to Distraction.
Yeah, Different to Distraction, driven by Dr. Hollywell, medical doctor, professor, has written 18 books, 5 of them on distraction, and this one in particular, Dr. Hollywell, he is ADHD and has dyslexia, and so. And when I went through the book in the store, I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book, actually, this is the actual book I picked up in 1997. I wrote in it on January 1997. Now I finally know who I am, but I wrote it in Dutch because there was still the stigma of ADHD being suggested to be a mental disorder. And I was already very active building companies and going to banks and making presentations for hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to expand. And then I would have to say, and by the way, I also have ADHD or mental disorder, and they would say, have a nice day, so. And so the point that I'm making is this one, Sean, in a way it applies that I had no idea I was not very successful academically. I failed grade 3, I failed grade 7 3 times, and became a laborer at 12 and a half years old, and was kind of looked at as being not smart enough and blah, 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 all this nonsense, but it always stayed with me as to why am I different? And then when I found the book, that changed my life in a way, and then finding that the frequency of occurrence, I thought probably between 6 and 10% maybe in that area, but it is much higher. And then, as I indicated to you earlier, you my podcast number 499, I did a podcast on the Brink 203 with Dr. Hollywell.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe it?
Perfect.
And so, and obviously he is the expert in, so, and when I had the discussion, I suggested to him that, against I lived it, he's the expert. I suggested to him that I bought the book and then had the impression maybe 6 to 10%, but the more I found out about it, the more I learned about it in Google and all the other places, I thought it'd be much higher than that. And I suggested to Dr. Hollywell that it is likely closer to 20%. And he said, no, John, probably more than 25%. I agree with them. And then the other thing that I found on frequency of occurrence is that I've been in business for 50 years here in Canada and have a number of companies, but it's not about that, but just making that point. I've learned, I met a lot of very successful individuals that are on board of directors or entrepreneurs that have been extremely successful. And the amazing part of it, I thought, and suggested to Dr. Hollywell, that I believe that of the successful is the operative. Entrepreneurs likely, in my opinion, 50% of them or ADHD? He said, no, John, probably 75%. I agree with him. And so the point that I'm trying to make here, Sean, is that I had no idea for 50 years, because it was kind of looked at as not being bright enough and being misinterpreted in a lot of cases, until I was 62. I found a book when I was 57. It took me 5 years before I would go to my doc, and that was a personal friend and delivered our 2 daughters. And I went to his office, and he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And he checked it out, and we checked it out, and yes, I do. It took me 50 years from the time that I was 12 and a half, and was basically told that, find a job because he will not amount to much. Obviously, he's not smart enough, and all the other crazy stuff, and became a laborer. I appreciate that today, but it took 50 years that the school system did not adapt to mental diversity issues, whatever they may be, in particular as it related to me, ADHD, dyslexia, and then only now, gradually still, the stigma is disappearing, people are interacting more about it, and I believe that's very, very encouraging. And in a way, as you mentioned, frequency of occurrence, that it initially was thought to be, I forget, you named a big number, I think something like 2,000, but you believe that some people believe that it would be 1 in 20, maybe, and I believe that likely is the case, no different than it was with ADHD, dyslexia, and some of the other ones that are different, but still relating to, the same theory, as that the frequency of current much higher and not well understood, and it's still evolving as we speak.
Yeah, it's almost every family that you'll speak of or you'll meet has somebody there with some psychiatric medication or mind-altering substance on a regular basis. So there's a lot of healing that needs to take place, across the board. And definitely you had PTSD, there's no doubt about it. And I just wanted to add one other thing, which is that I had 4 great uncles over there in the Netherlands, and they weren't there taking pictures. They weren't there on vacation.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so and in terms of medication, when I became aware of it, I do not take medication. I started out initially, I talked to my doc actually in early 2000, about 20 years ago or so, and say, as I kind of was reading about ADHD and what do they do, should I take medication? And he said, I don't know, maybe you can try, some, and I tried that, and didn't do nothing for me, and since the time I'm not using any medications, and I feel good with that. But
Now the story I told you about, how I got into doing this work, it's kind of a long story. Is that a challenge for you to follow? Do you find it difficult to kind of stay focused, or is it just
no.
okay?
Oh, I love it, so, and obviously it's an issue that I'm not as familiar with as with the other ones, but it has similarities that are amazing in a way, and it's one of those issues that is still being understood by the public at large. More of them already are relating to ADHD, dyslexia to a certain extent. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, nobody even knew about it or heard about it, like for me. And I believe the same applies to bipolar or other issues, like that. And I believe it is important to speak about it. I'm glad you wrote about it in your books to get a better understanding. And then also in regards to medication, I'm not, and neither is my wife and myself really, we believe in natural medicine, not in getting toxicity issues with a whole lot of medicine that will fix one thing but create a whole lot of other problems potentially.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
But the key is
One little,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say there was one additional tie-in to Rotterdam. I've been there many times for work. And one of my clients who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he's been off medication for 6 years now, 6 or 7 years. And now he's on a training to learn the techniques that I used to help him heal. He's studying to be a holotropic breathwork facilitator. That's my main therapeutic approach. And he's there learning how to do the work I was doing as a therapist. So really going from patient to therapist. And I've had a few clients like that.
I think it is amazing. That's the part that I like about it, Sean. It relates to issues that we really bipolar, is misunderstood to a certain extent. If even for me, although I know some people that are bipolar, and the tendency is to go from being high to low, more or less, and that's the most that I understand about it, but it likely falls into the category, correct me if I am wrong, is that no different than ADHD, was that the frequency of occurrence is maybe 5-6%, and up to about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I didn't have a clue what it was, and it was not until I bought this book, Driven to Distraction,
right,
in 1997, that after I was already here, for 32 years in Canada, and then obviously, 57, 60 years later from the time that, I was born and that I left school for unexplained reasons. But it's still evolving as we speak. Even now still, the educational system does not really address these issues with mental diversity issues relating to a number of factors, including ADHD, dyslexia, and likely bipolar.
Well, you had ADHD. I work with people with bipolar, but what I see is a person that was in a lot of pain, was traumatized, and to a certain degree, let's forget about the labels, heal the trauma, and then see what's there. Is the ADHD still there once the trauma's been healed? Once you no longer feel that cold from the Netherlands winter in your chest, that's a very tangible trauma that's right there, Once that feeling is let go of, what happens to the ADHD? I'd be very curious to see.
Yeah, interesting in a way, Sean. The way I look at it, and I wrote a book about it actually, ADHD Unlocked, and
Okay.
and I wrote a number of books. Actually, I'm working on my 6th one, and
I can see them in the back there.
yeah. So in spite of ADHD, or what I say is that ADHD has not been an obstacle to me. I've been successful not in spite of it, but because of it, likely. And so to understand it and to make it work for one is the main thing. And I call it a superpower. If you understand, not you, but in a general sense, if you understand how to use it and then make it work for you. But the first part that I believe I had to get through is knowing that I'm ADHD at a younger age. For me, it took from leaving school, failing grade 7 3 times, till 50 years later when I was diagnosed. I believe it is important for us to make early diagnoses and then make sure that there is confidence in the individuals, that it is not a negative, but it is something that you can make work for yourself, as you did, and obviously are the examples in the books that you wrote. And I believe that part is important. And it is important for me to speak about the issues of ADHD, dyslexia, and other issues on podcasting globally. A very amazing platform where we can reach a lot of people, and I believe I have an obligation to speak about it, and I believe you do the same.
Yeah, I do. And I was on YouTube for many years, and then entering into the pod match world where they match hosts with guests, I feel like it's given my work a whole new life, and meeting people who are very passionate about this subject, slightly different from my own perspective, like yours. And I love that we can find common ground and really create a new culture around what exactly is mental illness and what are the roots and when can it be a gift and when does it need serious attention? I think all those questions have not been answered fully.
And it should not automatically be considered to be a liability. It is it's not necessarily a disorder. It may well be the foundation of being different, but then accepting that, as I believe, in my life, for me, it's a benefit in a lot of ways, and obviously made me successful in business. And I just, by understanding it, I just make sure that I complement my management team around me that complement me in some of the things that are typical for individuals with dyslexia and and ADHD and dyslexia. And so it has worked for me, and it does, and I like that. And now to having the opportunity through platforms like podcasting and Podmatch in particular. And again, as I said earlier, Sean, you're my podcast number 499. Alex Filippio, who is the founder of Podmatch, is on my 500th, and that will be released tomorrow, actually. And I will do an interview with him for my 500th podcast. And
okay, terrific.
And it's only at the beginning, in my opinion, podcasting. If you look at the normal or the media that we see now, CNN, ABC, NBC, blah, 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 all of those, and in Canada, CTV and BBC, CBC, and in Europe, BBC, and all the other ones, their leadership is being reduced further and further and further, and medias like podcasting is still exploding in some areas, and globally. And the other part that we do, or that I do with my podcast, is that I do not edit it, other than we had a few minor corrections in where the voice disappeared a little bit because of you sitting in Brazil, and a little bit with your Wi-Fi. But all of that is a part of my podcasting, and we will be releasing our podcast within 2 hours. And so
this will go up within 2 hours.
Yes, that's what I do with all my podcasts. I unedit
That's
it,
incredible.
other than the little things that happen, we may slide it, but otherwise it is what it is. And that's what I do with my podcast. That's why I believe my podcasts are unique and different on all kinds of topics. This one was interesting, and I've done podcasting on a number of different mental diversity issues, but bipolar, I have not really had the opportunity, unfortunately, up to now. I think that will change, to have podcasts with persons that have experienced it, and not only to that point, you're the author of, can you show me your first book again as well?
Sure.
And your second one?
Oh, no. Yeah, this is the second book. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the first book with me right now, but both are available on my website, which is called Bipolar Awakenings. That's my website. And they're both available as free PDFs. So if you want to learn about my story, that's more the first book, which we've talked about a lot here. If you want to learn about my work, the second book is a little bit better, and how I've worked with clients, mostly in Europe, over the last 10 years.
I find it amazing, Sean. Amazing podcast. Again, for me, I've not had the opportunity to interact with individuals like you that have lived it and have been not only living it, but being critical to changing the understanding of what it is and what it can be. And it has been an awakening for me and my viewers watching it. And then also what I would say is that for our guests watching us from around the world, and if you like what we are doing in our podcasting, then subscribe to our podcast, like it if you like it, and share it with others, or make comments. And then again, Sean's books are available on all the major media areas, where in particular Amazon and John, as Sean already indicated. Give us once more your website, Sean, that they can finish.
Yeah, www.bipolarawakenings.com.
Sean.
All my work, you can get access there. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it, Sean. Well, let's make sure we stay in touch, and we'll release this podcast within 2 hours.
Wonderful. John, thank you for the short notice invitation. It was a pleasure.
It was equally so my pleasure. And stay in touch. Take care.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Bye-bye.